My guest today is Sam Cooper, investigative journalist and publisher of The Bureau. We discussed Justin Trudeau's testimony in the second leg of Canada's foreign interference inquiry, the lies, the cover-ups, and his sudden launching of a diplomatic war with India. Sam speaks off the cuff about what he believes to be the truth beneath Trudeau's deflections, the motivations behind his political attacks against India, and his concerted efforts to avoid questions regarding China's influence over his own government. Stay tuned. Sam Cooper, fixing the camera, back again. How you doing, my brother?
I'm great. Yeah, very good. Interesting times in Ottawa.
Yeah, dude. Well, usually we talk a little bit before we start, but so much has happened. It's like, let's just go. Let's just go. Let's just hit record and start. So, okay. So, oh, man, where do I even start? Okay. I want to start with Thanksgiving Day because I think this is a good place for us to begin.
Yeah.
So Thanksgiving Day, Justin Trudeau holds a press conference and basically tells the country that he's expelling Indian Indian diplomats from the country, that it basically launches a diplomatic war against India. Would you say that's accurate?
It's accurate. There's a war of it's been building, but it's pretty much unprecedented, I'd say. Yeah.
So let's just start with this. What's your take on this? What are the motives behind this? Because see, I posed this question on X and it got a lot of engagement from people. You know, we have a man who is suspected or who was allegedly involved in the Air India bombing in 1985, who's part of the Khalistani separatist movement, which for people who are unaware, especially our American listeners, it's a separatist movement, an Indian separatist movement, a group of people who want a separate state in India or from India. And so this man was gunned down. What was it, last year, I believe? Was it last year, right? In British Columbia.
Yep.
And so the accusation has been that the Indian government sent assassins to Canada specifically to assassinate this person. And the assassins then promptly got on an airplane and left the country. So that has caused quite a bit of controversy, of course, sending, when a country sends in foreign assassins to murder a Canadian citizen, that's a pretty big deal. But the question I posed is, okay, this is a big issue, obviously. However, I mean, can we talk about the hundreds and potentially thousands of murders committed by CCP connected organized crime members over the last 20, 30 years in Canada? Why isn't he addressing that? And that's my question. And I guess that's my question to you. Why is this one circumstance so catastrophic in view of the Trudeau government when you have so many other, groups operating here in Canada?
Yeah, maybe there's so much to analyze, but I could break it down by, like most Canadians, I was enjoying time with my family. A loved relative said, we're reading their phone, and they said, what's going on with India and Canada? And of course I said, don't get me started, because you've asked the person that probably knows about as much as anyone. And my first reaction was, okay, the RCMP has broken every protocol that it adheres to, which is not commenting on investigations. And unlike when Prime Minister Trudeau stood up last summer and made the allegations, which stunned a lot of people, that Nijar had been connected to allegedly, Indian state assassins. This time we have the RCMP breaking their protocol during ongoing investigations and doing the press conference for them. So my first reaction was, okay, now they're confirming what I've been reporting for years, that hostile states are at a systemic level using organized crime to destabilize Canadian democracy and, violently target diasporas. And they went beyond that, taking it into what I would call sort of like the hybrid war zone And none of that shocked me because I have this information that India, allegedly at the highest levels, are so pissed off at Trudeau and his way of doing politics, which is to favor sort of the Sikh community to gather votes. He traveled, as we know, to India with a known Khalistan separatist terrorist in his entourage. So India feels justified to do their targeting of what they see as terrorists in Canada. We know this. It's a horrible situation and there's so much going on. But, I knew that they were using allegedly this Lawrence Bishnoi gang to target not just Nijar, but there have been alleged murders or suspected murders across Canada. And, as the RCMP said, we believe it's a campaign to destabilize these communities. It's not just targeting, Sikh extremists. So crazy. And my reaction is, yes, I believe that to be true. But why is the RCMP, as you point to, coming out on Thanksgiving Day with this press conference? And the first thought in my mind is, if I'm India and I've heard from their diplomats, they're going to say this is Trudeau playing politics. And they would have a reasonable argument, because why is he doing it the day before his chief of staff is supposed to testify on why his government has been ignoring threats from China for 6 years, why his government sat on a warrant looking into a Chinese threat actor that was involved in Trudeau's election campaign for at least, 54 days, all these hard questions. And it goes beyond that. It's not just China that Trudeau hasn't been acting on. As our listeners know, we've been talking about for months. I've reported for the Bureau that Trudeau's government intervened in a CSIS disruption targeting Indian diplomats in Vancouver and their activities against the Sikh community. So the very activity that he and now the RCMP are saying, this is a national crisis of public safety, we have to warn the public, Trudeau and his government intervened to stop it for their own political reasons in 2017. Not too many people have followed, picked up on my reporting, but it's damning. So one, the timing, it does look suspicious, as others have noticed. He's having a caucus revolt. Two, the evidence is pretty clear that he turned a blind eye because China was helping him. And, no one's saying that he won the last two elections because of China. But people that I know are definitely saying certainly he ignored it because he was benefiting. So those are the reasons. A man that's fighting for his political life, and no matter what anyone says, I'm one of those people that thinks our prime minister doesn't have it in his character. Obviously, he's a fighter, which can be a good quality. But if you're taking the nation down with you while you're fighting for your political career, I think that's kind of, the types of activities we saw in that press conference that we'd never see in the United States. Well, who knows what could happen in a few weeks. Maybe I take that back.
Right.
But look, it's just crazy and it's chaotic. And a lot of people pointed out that no matter what you say about India, they're bad and they're getting worse. This is just crazy what's happening in Canada, and confirming what I've been reporting, that hostile states use gangs first and foremost. But China is magnitude's greater threat. And as the US government says, how many people are being killed by, fentanyl that's, intentionally put into our nations, right? To kill and to destabilize society. So whatever China is doing is, thousands of times just on the order of magnitude of harm and threat to our long-term, public safety and our security. China is so much worse. And so you have this dichotomy in Trudeau's response that I think the history books will not look kindly on the past few days in Canada.
Yeah, especially considering that, if you have to make a choice, right? If you need some sort of controversy or some conspiracy to help maintain your grip on power, and you're making the choice between India and China, just in terms of, economic power, and diplomatic strength. India is obviously not the people you want to piss off. So there is in my view, a concerted effort to avoid the China question. Am I right there?
I mean, if I was going to choose someone to piss off, I still would choose India rather than China, just
Okay.
based on, military might. But the question of Trudeau's party's exposure to China, it would be very difficult for them to actually come out and do anything. I think we've talked about this and really point to things, because you have to understand that the likelihood that China has compromising material on a number of people within the Liberal Party and all parties. But my information would be, if we're talking about collusion between states and parties, yeah, China and the Liberal Party would be pretty much hand in glove in that. Not to say that other politicians in the Conservative and NDP parties and their adjacent, parties up and down from, federal down to the municipal and school boards, China would have people in all parties, but more so the Liberals.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. So everything Trudeau did this week just reeked of deflection to me. It just felt like he was just desperately deflecting. He blamed Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson for destabilizing democracy, which is just what? He pointed fingers in every direction except for himself. He basically tried to frame himself as being somebody who's just blissfully unaware of everything that's happening within his own government. Now, I want to start with the Conservative Party because, you and I, Mia especially, I spent a lot of time beating up on Trudeau and beating up on the Liberal Party. But you just raised a good point that this infection of our democracy by Chinese communism is widespread. It's not just limited to the Liberal Party. And Justin Trudeau, during his testimony this week, pointed fingers at the Conservatives and said he has actual proof that there is foreign interference and foreign influence over the Conservative Party. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, I'll tread a bit carefully. One, it was entirely chaotic and politically motivated. It's entirely hypocritical because Trudeau, his senior aides, his senior ministers, so Dominic LeBlanc, Marco Mendicino, former minister, now a backbencher, why we don't know, Bill Blair, and others are out there saying, we don't need a kangaroo court of people, on intelligence leaks, naming names, or the Trudeau's senior officials went as far to say, as this NSI Cup 2024 report that talks about a number of parliamentarians colluding or worse with foreign nations, pretty much they're suggesting that it's making a bigger deal out of things than they actually are. And then, so again, I get back to, okay, RCMP press conference completely wiped away the government's sort of minimizing. Yeah, it is bad, and it's a lot worse than Canadians know. And now we have Trudeau, whether off script or not, whether getting emotional or not, which he can do, suddenly saying, oh, I didn't plan to be so partisan, but now I'm going to turn to the cameras and say, I have a list, a number of parliamentarians, past and present, Conservative. So, I mean, it's... that was just incredible. And it's only going to turn up the pressure on Canadians wanting to have names.
Yeah.
But, do the Conservatives have vulnerabilities? I've reported already in my updated chapter for willful blindness that I was informed by people that have proven 100% accurate and will continue to be proven more accurate than people know, that a Conservative senator based in Ontario was a very important member of the Chinese election interference network. So this is the network that uses Chinese secret police in Canadian soil under diplomatic cover, working with organized crime proxies who claim to be community leaders and targeting politicians that Beijing thinks it can support, covertly funding, getting media support. this senator would be part of that directly. So he's a conservative, or was a conservative. Aaron O'Toole came out in his testimony, the former leader, and pointed to a conservative senator inappropriately lobbying for a Chinese state-owned enterprise, with a mayor in a Canadian or an Ontario town. So this tells you that, the Conservative Party has vulnerabilities with members. There's no question to that. The allegations that the Conservative leader is strangely turning a blind eye. I don't know about that. As you know, the leader came out and said that Trudeau is lying. But what I can say is, look, let's revert to the documents of NSI COP 2019. I've reported on them. All major Canadian political parties have vulnerabilities with hostile states. If the words were not colluding, but involved in interference with Canadian politicians. So there's no question that I think, Trudeau does have a number of names that, my information too would agree that the Conservative Party has some problems. But that doesn't change the fact that it's an egregious deflection away from his government that's been in power 8 years now, and has, as the reporting and the evidence showed. I've suggested to you, that it's a live question whether they're obstructing justice into investigations targeting very important people for the Liberal Party's election campaigns. So there's no question in my mind that Trudeau is trying to cover up for activities in his party, and the government is the ones responsible for not implementing the reforms that have been recommended now since 2018. Yeah. So, if someone's guilty here, it's the person in power and it's the person at the top with all that knowledge, which, before yesterday, it seemed he was claiming not to have the knowledge until he was in the hot seat, and he said he's got a heck of a lot of knowledge. Yeah.
And that brings me to my next topic, because you wrote a story on this, and I quoted it with a clip from our last episode together, because Trudeau claims that he missed 5 important reports, right?
At least, yeah.
At least.
And claims.
And that's claims.
A claim. In my writing, that's a claim.
I love it. Sam Cooper getting spicy. I dig it. Okay. So, this is the thing. When we talk to each other, I do my best to respect your journalistic integrity, right? So I try not to speculate too much. But look, at this point in time, come on, man. Like, why are we doing this anymore? Why are we playing this game? I get that we're a country of law and order and justice and all this stuff. I get that. But it's, how much more proof do we need? How much more evidence is required? And now we're supposed to just base, our decisions, or at least the legal system is supposed to base their decision around a bunch of people who are clearly lying. Is that where we are now?
I would agree with that. I mean, I've had a little bit enough of whether it's the CBC or the Toronto Star, and there's good reporters in those entities reporting that Bill Blair says he didn't know about the warrant. Justin Trudeau says he didn't know about China targeting his MPs. If you're going to look south of the border and say, let's be a little rigorous with claims, then you need to do it, where we live. And so let's look at Bill Blair. Continued to maintain that he had no idea that his office and his senior official, received a warrant targeting Liberal Party power broker Michael Chan, and that, Blair had no idea until May 11th or something like that, when, a whole bunch of testimony showed that there were deep inconsistencies between his testimony and his staff member, Zita Astrovis, who, was a former colleague of Michael Chan, who worked with the Trudeau office, et cetera, worked on all kinds of campaigns. And so when you have Bill Blair saying, I had no idea until May, and my sources, who I've told you, I wasn't able to break the story for certain reasons that the Globe and Mail broke, my sources informing me that actually in Toronto CSIS headquarters, there was a conversation with Bill Blair 4 months before the warrant is signed, roughly, in which Bill Blair was informed of the warrant and the target and said, Michael Chan is a key fundraiser for our party. Targeting Michael Chan could raise concerns of anti-Asian racism. If my sources are saying that and Bill Blair is saying another thing, I'm going to tell all Canadians, you take it to the bank that my sources are correct and he's incorrect.
And if the concern around investigating somebody who's involved in not just criminal, but traitorous activity, right? Or treasonous, I should say, treasonous activity, is whether or not it will be perceived as racism, is just absolutely ridiculous to me. And based on those grounds alone is enough for us to throw out our entire government and start from scratch, because obviously we're doing the wrong thing here. What if he was black? What if he's, I don't know, Norwegian? What if he's West African, which is black too? So I'm kind of running around in circles here. But point is so we can only investigate somebody for treasonous behavior if they're white? Is that what's going on here?
The problem here is, I mean, and I'll add that Michael Chan strongly and in a very interesting, very lengthy statement last week denied any, involvement in Chinese interference, said he was the victim of misguided CSIS investigations and media links. By the way, Justin Trudeau yesterday in his testimony repeatedly and emotionally talked about criminal intelligence leaks. So we'll leave that where it is. But the point of especially the Liberal Party, whenever something comes up about, vulnerabilities with regards to China, refers to anti-Asian racism. It happened with the Winnipeg Lab, People's Liberation Army, infiltration. It happened when, a certain, MP was questioned. First of all, Trudeau came out and told, various media. This raised his, concern about anti-Asian racism. It continues to happen to this day whenever I see a social media comment, when I post a story and I'll see someone say, and I think, okay, well, you're saying what Chinese intelligence says. So that raises the point. When Bill Blair says things like this, when Justin Trudeau says things like this, is it someone, inside their office that is, apparently these are supposed to be, rather, forceful and intellectual gentlemen. Like, are they being brainwashed? Are they that weak-minded that, they're so open to suggestion that they just jump on that? Or are they using that argument to protect themselves? Or, are they a little bit more complicit than that, or implicated in that? Whatever it is, to your point, it's wrong. It's not the way to operate a society or a country.
Well, by those metrics, wouldn't expelling a bunch of Indian diplomats from our country be anti-Indian racism?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, right? Anything Russians, that would be like Russo. What do you call it?
Russophobia,
Russophobia, yeah.
Right, that's the point is that these people roll out, their DEI ideology whenever it's convenient to them, and whenever and look again, I'll go back to this. At this point, they're clearly hiding, right? They're clearly trying to cover something up here, and
there's so many inconsistencies in testimony that I could not see any intellectually honest person that's watched the inquiry every day and say that this isn't a cover-up among Justin Trudeau and his senior officials to the highest levels. And I'll just, before you continue on your role, I'll give you one example. We've talked about how Trudeau's senior national security advisor, who in his testimony, he says that, her position is to be the gatekeeper of all intelligence. The claim is that it was her decision to withhold this targeting paper, which describes how Beijing categorizes Canadian MPs into either a friend of Beijing, neutral or convincible, or an enemy. And in my suggestion to our listeners, this is exactly what the United Front does in choosing who to support, who to attack, and who to work on very strategically. Jody Thomas, this advisor, in her own testimony, refuted the claims that it was her decision to withhold the paper. And yet Justin Trudeau in his testimony says she made the right decision in withholding the paper.
Right.
So there's a direct, that is the evidence, that is the flag of a cover-up, right? And it's why I say when he says he didn't see anything, it's only a claim. And I could step into a court of law and say that because he's claiming one thing. His national security advisor is saying, actually, it wasn't me. So it's a claim. The public has to decide because the inconsistency is too much.
And that's exactly it. I mean, the problem with our Canadian politicians is that they're not as slick as, say, their American counterparts, right? And so this theater that we've all been subject to for, I mean, the last, 3-4 weeks and just years in the past, right? I mean, you've been on top of it forever. I mean, it's just so obvious. And that's the way, like, I feel about it all is like, I'm watching it. Like, I watched Justin Trudeau's testimony and I'm like, this is just like, he's so obviously lying. If you have any, like, even just a fragment of human instinct inside of you, you can sense that this guy is lying. Right. And the thing that frustrates me is that we kind of have this way that we present ourselves as Canadians, especially, you know, when it's televised and it's in a commission setting or a courtroom setting where we never address directly. And that's the part that's frustrating to me is like, if I was in the room, if I was cross-examining him, I would just straight up tell him, you're a liar. You're lying. We know you're lying. Everybody here knows you're lying. Everybody watching knows you're lying. You're lying. Right.
Or, more diplomatic, Prime Minister, I'm sorry, I'm having a problem believing you on that point.
Right. But
others have made the point. The Commission Council, who is put in place to supposedly get to the bottom of things, you would have thought if they were getting to the bottom of things, when the RCMP was in a panel and was asked about all these interference allegations, the RCMP would have testified, actually, we have major concerns that a hostile state is using organized crime to destabilize our communities. But no, this never came out until, as we've said, you know, this insane news conference and the timing of it. So yeah, I've seen others. My colleague Stephen Chase at the Globe and Mail, who does good work, says when the Commission Council is questioning witnesses, it's the opposite of a hot seat. They let these people that are trained to run the clock and obfuscate and put out, you know, spin, they let them expound instead of saying, I'm sorry, sir, I right? And, you know, with the lawyers who happen to be representing conservative politicians who claim that they've either lost seats or their families are in danger because of negligence, obviously those lawyers are a little bit more pointed. Yeah. But I agree with you. They could go farther, everyone.
Well, it's like an OJ bloody glove situation, right? Like we're supposed to just accept it. All right. That's what he said. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's what he said. And for people who are too young to remember, you know, just look it up on YouTube. But it's like, okay, that's what he says. That's what we have to accept. And that's the part that's really bothering me is that we're in this position where it's just like, that's what he's telling us. Accept it. Accept that as truth. When in fact, we all know he's lying. And it feels like people in legacy media, I'll be really honest with you here. It feels like aside from yourself and a very short list of other people, nobody is confronting them directly on this. And this commission is designed specifically for those confrontations to handle them in a legal environment, right? So why is nobody confronting Trudeau or Melanie Joly or any of the other ministers directly? It just feels like they're using legal language to dance around the subject to try to get him to say something that will expose him. But he's so deep in the lie that like he's on Pluto and we're on Earth, and he's not even in the same dimension anymore.
Those were my thoughts yesterday, that, you know, you can go so far and you can act like you're trying to get to the bottom of it. But then arguably, I mean, when he literally said, okay, I'm gonna get a little partisan here. And then he brought out his talking points, which clearly, I mean, you know, if you're a lawyer, if you're Commissioner Hogue, you must have been crumbling inside because you're thinking, our prime minister is using this forum to save his political career, arguably in a way attacking his opponent, just so deeply inappropriate the way that information was brought
Yes.
out. And yet you're the commission lawyer. You had to sit there and just let him keep talking. I almost, we're not China. They're not going to turn off the TV and say we can't allow that. But I mean, the forum was it was incredible. It was like, I mean, yeah, I can't get over it.
As a journalist, right? As a guy who, you've written books about this. You've just updated your book. I'm working my way through that updated chapter, and it's amazing, by the way. But as a journalist, and I mean the best of the best, top tier, when you watch something like this, what goes through your head? Like from an honest perspective, are you like analyzing this and just, is your stomach turning knowing how bad this all really is? Like what are your thoughts as you're watching this?
I mean, first and foremost, I'm like getting 2 to 3 stories out a day. So I have my notes, I've cut like my data banks. I get excited when he had to testify about what this targeting paper was in his view. I've written that the his attorney general has blocked this paper from being, submitted to the commission, which is huge. Meanwhile, he and his government are saying it's just diplomatic activity. Well, if that's the case, why are you blocking its submission to the commission? But for the first time, he's saying, well, it refers to, how China is categorizing into friend, neutral, convincible, foe. Bing, because I know the United Front so well, I know that this is United Front political warfare. That's what they assign everyone in the world that matters to them into those categories and say, we're either going to, if they're convincible, we're going to spend a lot of time and energy bringing them into friend. If they're an enemy, we don't try that. We focus our attacks on them. If they're a friend, we support them. We boost them. This is how they're undermining our nation. So I get excited thinking, okay, I can write about that and add value to all Canadians that won't get this knowledge from anyone else. But my reaction is visceral as anyone else's when I saw him up there spinning, his charm and knowing what I know. I mean, it's somewhat of a sickening feeling, and it's a feeling of outrage that he's actually, damaging the country as he's speaking. And there's also a feeling that some people, for partisan reasons, will still eat it up. So those are kind of, there's kind of an intellectual response, and there's just a very, human gut response.
And important to note, when he talks about those categories, Justin Trudeau, his response is, well, that's diplomacy. Right? Like to me, that's like, okay, at that moment, you are no longer fit for your job. I don't care if you're lying or not. You don't belong where you are.
Yeah, that it's such a brazen lie, and it was repeated by his chief of staff. Again, the former national security advisor, a guy named David Morrison with Global Affairs Canada, has come up repeatedly calling this Chinese intelligence clandestine targeting and efforts to subvert our democracy. And they've gotten very far with this current government in doing so, calling that diplomacy and saying in Canada, we do that when we're working on an issue with the United States. We'll look into various politicians and categorize them. Are you kidding me? Right? Because you're comparing our activities to a hostile state that's dealing fentanyl in our country and has secret police on our soil and is threatening our citizens, right? You're comparing our activities to them. It just shows how deeply dishonest, I can't get over it because it's repeated over and again. And it's just so clearly a cover-up of their, implication in China's interference.
Yeah, and like the fentanyl issue is one that drives me insane because you could be looking at the world with one eye open and see it in your peripheral vision and recognize immediately what's happening. It doesn't take a lot to figure this out, right? And through your reporting, through people like Adam Zivo, I think that the pieces are all together now. We know that the fentanyl is coming into the country through Chinese organized crime gangs, right? And that we have an epidemic specifically in British Columbia and in Vancouver that is, for our American listeners, this is like nothing you've ever seen before. Like, I've been to downtown Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles. I've been downtown many times. Skid Row isn't even close to what's happening in Vancouver right now. And this is fentanyl coming in and just flooding our country. I'm in Alberta and we have a fentanyl problem here now too. It's moving eastward, right? And we know how it's getting here. We know who the players involved are. We know that those players are connected to the Chinese Communist Party. And it's safe to assume that the proceeds from fentanyl sales are being donated to certain political campaigns in order to support and boost political candidates that the CCP is in favor of. So if you cut out B, C, D, and E, and you just look at A through F, then you can see that fentanyl is coming into our country and those proceeds are ending up in the pockets of our politicians and in their campaigns. This is, I'm alleging here, but come on, right? Like, let's get real. And this is something that Trudeau, I don't think I have ever heard him address directly.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I've said to you a number of times, based on my information, underground casinos run by Chinese organized crime with connections to officials from the People's Liberation Army and Chinese intelligence and police are involved in the funding, allegedly, of Chinese interference operations, cash operations. And senior alleged Chinese intelligence officials are donors to Justin Trudeau and frequently seen with Justin Trudeau. Proxies that would be involved in these organized crime activities, per my information, would be directly involved in the support of some very key candidates. People that, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Suffice to say, you're correct. Underground criminal activity is funding, the operations of China. And as our prime minister has confirmed, India is using, criminal activities in its operations in Canada, but he hasn't come out yet and said that, China, of course, is as well.
And the point that the fact that he keeps trying to avoid the China question is just cause for pause to begin with. But, was something I want to touch on, because I know we only have about 20 minutes left. It seems like there's a growing rift between Canada's intelligence agency, CSIS, and the Trudeau government. It seems like they are on completely separate pages. Now, for our American listeners, this isn't a similar situation, say, to the American deep state and Donald Trump. This is something that is totally different. This is CSIS sees a threat. They've highlighted and underlined the threat. They know where it's coming from. They know the people involved. They are attempting to, they have attempted on numerous occasions to make our prime minister aware of these threats, but yet he has yet to respond to really any of them. Now, can you comment on that growing divide between Canadian intelligence and the prime minister's office and where you see this going?
Yeah, that's come up. I mean, that theme, as you know, we talked about it before. I think my book, laid the groundwork, but in the past few weeks, over and over again, the lawyers are talking about this divide between Trudeau's office, senior political aides, senior bureaucrats that are, favored by his party, obviously, gatekeepers of intelligence, taking the view that China's activities are normal diplomacy, while CSIS, is not, just focused on one country. Since 2018, the documents say they've been telling the prime minister, okay, if it's India, you need to be briefing parliamentarians about the dangers of both Sikh extremism in Canada and how that's a problem for India and India's interference in responding to that. And he did nothing until, basically standing up last year in Parliament and for whatever reason, this press conference. So he didn't act on that. And China, a bigger problem for him, going right back to his leadership in 2013. And CSIS has for years been saying you need to do something about all these hostile states, and China, of course, by far the biggest threat. And he hasn't done anything. And so, you're right. We can always have the debate about various political leaders and whether they're being, whether things get politicized in the bureaucracy. But in this case, the evidence is very clear. Canada is getting tipsy and wobbly with regards to foreign nations deeply interfering, especially in diasporas, leveraging, right? And nothing's happening. So that is the case where we've talked about in the US, if it doesn't matter what race you are, if you live in a United States city and the country where your family may still live is targeting you for certain reasons, US justice is going to do something, not so in Canada. So that's the issue.
And that's the glaring issue. And it's the one that you and I have spent almost a year talking about. I mean, I think this is our 13th episode together, right? Like, and when you and I talk, we basically scratch the surface of the stuff, because these episodes would be 4 or 5 hours if we went into detail of, everything, and everything that you've found over the years. But the reality is that this rabbit hole goes deep. It goes deep, and for lack of a better phrase, it goes all the way to China, right?
It goes all the way to China. It goes all the way to Delhi. It goes all the way to Tehran. And yeah, I mean, what I know is a lot. I know a lot by now, but I trust people that tell me when they say, even though, you may be hated by some in government, there are people in government that really appreciate what you've done because you're causing conversation, you're informing change, real policy change, legal change, and Canadians still don't know the half of how all these countries are interfering in our society. So that, which I've known these kind of viewpoints for a long time, despite whatever sort of counter backlash I might face, this is what keeps me going. And then, when we see an announcement like Monday, which, as I've said, I believe the allegations against India are completely true because all this information I had, it's politically motivated, but that is telling you that the people that were saying Canadians don't know the half were correct. Now they know a little bit that they were told on Monday and they're stunned, right? Yeah. So it gets worse than what you heard on Thanksgiving Monday, Canadians. It gets a lot worse. So
is this diplomatic war against India, in your view, is it a diversion away to keep attention away? Because I caught on to it too. On Monday, I looked on X and there's Trudeau doing his thing. And I listened to the press conference and I thought, that's interesting because he's testifying at the foreign interference inquiry this week, as is some of his cabinet members. And it seems like he's trying to create a bigger story in order to divert attention away from what's about to happen this week. Did you feel that at all when you watched it?
Yeah. And you know me, I'm careful. I'm not going to jump out and say very clearly this was a political tactic. Of course, in my mind, a big question mark was raised because strategically, by that information coming out on Monday, it didn't need to come out on Monday, right? But it came out on Monday, while the prime minister was facing some very big, issues. One, the testimony. Another one that, he knew reporters would be clamoring after. What are you doing about this caucus revolt? Are you going to stand down? So it changes, it turns the page to a story. And I'm saying it's a true story, but selectively that story is coming to the surface. And by pushing that one up, it can push down the bigger story, which is that China is supporting your government and has been right from the start of your leadership. Yeah. Right. And that's the bigger problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, man, there's so much I want to talk about here. I feel like you and I just got started. Yeah. So, he's clearly creating a diversion. And then you have this was hilarious to me, and I know you saw this, and I just want your comment on it. Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau's coalition government partner, the guy who has single-handedly kept Trudeau in power until recently, he comes out and says, we're going to sanction the diplomats who are involved or responsible for this stuff. And to me, I'm thinking, okay, this guy has, like, he's lost the plot. Like, he clearly doesn't understand how these things work and how, like, sanctions actually, right? Like, he's clearly out of his mind here. Like, he just exposed himself as having no idea how our system, or how the global system actually works. What was your takeaway from his comments there?
I've personally seen him in action, and I find him likable and actually, a pretty smart person in some ways. But my deeper thought, whenever he comments on the issue, I mean, yes, we have Indian interference, but we should have a category of Khalistan separatist interference on a number of Canadian politicians. I heard a former CSIS director raise a question of, it's very troubling that, some Canadian politicians, when asked, they won't really give their opinion of what's going on with the Air India bombing, which is at the center of, India's interference in Canada right now. So, I mean, my thoughts are, for him to be commenting on sanctioning India, it's not going to help the diplomatic crisis, because they're going to be able to make some allegations too.
Yeah. And, so speaking of diplomacy, I got two last things I want to talk about before you go, and then we'll cut it. But in Justin Trudeau's testimony at the Foreign Interference Inquiry, he also talked about Donald Trump a little bit. And all signs indicate that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. And there is this, Justin Trudeau is very, I don't know if he genuinely is attached to the ideology that he represents, but he represents it well. And Donald Trump is the antithesis to that ideology. And now, on a diplomatic level, if Donald Trump is elected in a week or two, how does our relationship with the United States improve, or does it continue to deteriorate under a Justin Trudeau government?
It'll deteriorate, because you're right. By Trudeau making those remarks about, his defense of what his government has been doing on foreign interference was, we saw the election in 2016, we saw the Brexit. So he's selectively focusing on, Russian disinformation, or, allegations that would touch on the right side of the aisle rather than the center and the left. But very clearly, if Trump wins, then that, for Justin Trudeau's base, that will become, a powerful motivating factor. And you can almost take that to the bank, that'll become a key talking point in a very balanced way. They'll start to talk about, they'll throw red meat to their base about they're going to take this position, or they're working on plans, if ideologically motivated, gun owners start flooding the border, or if Trump, they're obviously going to try to capitalize on that politically. And to an extent, America will have bigger issues to focus on, in, China, Taiwan, etc. But the relationship won't improve. That's for sure, between our countries. And as I've said, for the people we both can talk to, so people in military, experts south of the border, they would say it doesn't matter. I mean, whether it's Trump, Biden, or Kamala Harris, that the American state distrusts Canada's leader now. And so that, nothing, it's only going to get worse in the coming months.
Yeah. And so the clip of you and I talking about AUKUS went semi-viral. Well, I'm being modest. It went viral. And I had a couple of my guys on the American side reach out to me and say, Sam Cooper is like, once again, on the nose. Absolutely right. But they said that the one thing that we missed is that this growing divide between the United States and Canada also has defense consequences to it as well. And that this Trudeau government is leaving us out in the cold. Should there ever be any aggression toward Canada, we might find ourselves in a dangerous position because our armed forces are not at this time equipped to deal with any external threat. And the Americans, in some ways, would have reservations about how much military force they would assist us with. It would more than likely just be, an attempt to protect the border between Canada and the United States, but that our working relationship, if a military response was required, would be severely limited. Do you get the same sense?
To the extent that the Arctic and the North is becoming much, much more important. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, the United States will simply override our sovereignty and protect their interests. And, if things get very serious, there won't be a lot of coordination. It'll just be very embarrassing for us, if not worse. But what you raise is just at a practical level, our standing in the world and diplomatically on issues of trade or anything else is just rapidly falling since we can't contribute our part militarily and even on our own soil. So yeah, I do think that'll get worse, and no one's anticipating China or Russia to attack the North very soon, but the danger is increasing, and those kind of incidents where you'll see sort of breaches being made up north are very much kind of probably in the near future, in terms of people traveling where they shouldn't travel and us having no response to it.
That's right. And we are a pathway into the United States, right? So if our borders aren't secure, or if we have a government that's wildly incompetent or irresponsible, like it appears we have right now, that is a security issue for the United States, right? That is a danger to them. That is a threat to them. If they have potential terrorists flowing through an open border between Canada and the United States, which our border is pretty open, then those are real cause for concern for the American defense, right?
That's how it hits, the everyday person much more directly or quickly than a military conflict is. You enjoy traveling to the United States for various things. We enjoy trade, and that will start to be limited under this government because of those very issues. The United States is getting tougher at its northern border because they have concerns about vulnerabilities traveling down from, first and foremost, terrorist threats from Canada.
Okay, final question. Sam, we got to do this again real soon because I didn't even get to like 90% of the stuff I want to talk about. We have a revolt brewing inside of the Liberal Party. Now, I'm cynical as always because we've been hearing about these rifts between, party members and Trudeau forever, right? I mean, every few months, it's Trudeau's going to resign. Trudeau's going to be replaced. Trudeau has to go. And the Liberal Party are waking up to this. I mean, I remember last year reading reports from senior Liberal Party members who were calling for Trudeau to step down. Now, this growing caucus revolt, from what I've read so far, it's about 30 MPs who have, kind of come together and are attempting to push Trudeau out and, find a new leader essentially and trigger an election. What are your thoughts on this? How realistic is it that we'll see Trudeau disappear from our sites in the near future? And, is there anything that can stop him at this point?
I mean, my thoughts are similar to yours. I know of liberals, good people that believe that he was taking the party down with them, maybe for a long time. Uh, and they've been looking for levers and angles to see if they could get him out. And my take was always, okay, I'll believe it when I see it. But again, being a fighter is a very good characteristic sometimes. But if you place it in, connection with bad judgment and maybe, bad character, and if I can go that far, that's what he's demonstrating. Right. And so I don't see him relinquishing his hold. And I think his reaction, if I'm not a psychologist, but to these reports was, okay, I'm going to show them. And so during the testimony, to me, he shows how far he will go politically. People saw how far. If we take the theory that the timing of the announcement Monday, raising this public safety crisis to that level was showing how he will respond. If I'm an MP that was thinking of putting my name on a list, when I see that, my thoughts will be, he's not going anywhere. He's digging in. And I don't want to expose my name on a list, because if he can do this type of, chaotic political response on a national forum, what's he going to do inside the caucus to me if I stick my head up?
And I think that's what what has been driving a lot of what we've seen, is that in a lot of ways, the thing that has always kind of stunned me about Justin Trudeau and his behavior is that on the global stage, he presents this empathetic, compassionate, very soft Canadian approach to geopolitics. But internally, he's a junior dictator. And that's the way he behaves. And it seems to me like he is only where he is right now because people within the Liberal Party are afraid of being, politically targeted by him internally within his own party because they disagree with his approach.
Yeah, I would sense that. I mean, I would sense that. And I'm, as a campaigner, again, not a psychologist, but few would have, the actual physical fortitude and the mental fortitude to be out there just grinding every day the way he does. So he has characteristics. It's become, he has a good characteristics if they were tethered to a good correct direction for the country. But I see them going in a bad direction. And I think he believes and knows that he's an extremely good campaigner, and he's not going to back away from that, what people are calling his last campaign.
Well, I mean, polls are so stupid and you can't really believe in them because I don't respond to them when they call me. So I don't know who's talking to these people, but, but current polls, all polls indicate that the Liberals are sliding into third place, which, for our American listeners, that would be the Democrats. That would be like the Democrats sliding behind the Green Party. In the United States. So like that's the level of damage. Now you can take that how you want to. We don't know until the election day, but it just seems like everything he does, he's just making it worse. Right.
Yeah. He took the party and he brought them up, he brought them back, and it's looking like he'll take it all the way back down to the ground floor and below. That's the way it's going.
And let's leave it there. Sam, can we talk again in a couple of weeks, my brother? I didn't even get to Zita Astravas. I didn't get to Melanie Jolie. I didn't get to Jody Thomas or anybody.
Yeah, the point is, based on that testimony yesterday, there's no way that this is dying away now. It's only getting things are going to keep rolling. So yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Okay. In the meantime, Sam, where can everybody find you?
Go to thebureau.news, where I've just reached over 12,000 subscribers, and going to convert more of them into paying to pay my bills and all of that. So yeah, thebureau.news, just go there. Yeah.
And listen, guys, Sam is very active on X at Scooper Cooper, but as writers, I place you and I in very different categories, and you are a real journalist, my friend. And for our listeners, like I say this every time, but the Bureau is my morning reading. It's where I read. I forget to like stuff all the time because I drink my coffee, then I'm on to the next. But But the Bureau is where I start my day. And I'm telling you, if you want to be informed on not just what's happening in Canada, but what's happening in the world, Sam does a lot of reporting on American politics and American issues as well. Go to the Bureau. Sam is the only guy that you need to trust on this stuff. He's been proven accurate again and again and again. And in a lot of ways, I know you would never say this, but I will say this. We only have a foreign interference inquiry because of your work. That's how much of an impact you're having, right? Our country is aware of what has been happening behind the scenes because of the work Sam Cooper has done. And Sam Cooper is independent so that he doesn't have to answer to editors, so that he doesn't have to pass his work through people who may sanitize or block those documents. So the Bureau exists. Trust me when I tell you, any newsroom in the world would be happy to have Sam Cooper. And the Bureau exists because he is committed to providing you real, raw truth, unfiltered, uneditorialized. That's what the Bureau is. So please go through and subscribe and become a paid subscriber, buy Willful Blindness. And in the meantime, subscribe to Brave New Normal too. Secondary thought. Yeah, there. All right, Sam, my brother, hang around for 10 seconds. We'll say goodbye privately. But in the meantime, brother, we'll see you again in a couple weeks. And I'll actually ask the questions that I wanted to ask today.
All right.
All right.